I've spent years wondering why I could imagine a stronger version of myself while living like someone half asleep. Why I wanted depth but kept choosing distraction. Why I dreamed of extraordinary focus yet moved through my days like a man endlessly negotiating with his own excuses. I told myself I needed more motivation, more clarity, more spark. But the truth was far more brutal. My brain wasn't designed for discipline. It was designed for dopamine. And once I understood that, everything inside me changed. There's a moment right before I begin anything difficult when my mind whispers the same soft sabotage. Check your phone first. Take a short break. Start when you feel ready. And that whisper feels harmless, almost logical, but it carries the weight of 1,000 wasted days. I never noticed how many times I obeyed it. I never realized how much of my life was built on tiny surrenders I didn't even recognize as decisions. Nietzsche said the human being is something that must be overcome, not through inspiration but through confrontation with the self. He believed that every avoidance of struggle was a quiet betrayal of who we could become. And when I read him, I felt exposed. Because I wasn't avoiding effort. I was avoiding the version of myself that effort would force me to confront. Then came William James, the father of modern psychology, who shattered another illusion I clung to, that action comes after motivation. He showed me the opposite. That action creates motivation, that every behavior deepens a pathway in the brain, and that procrastination is not a personality flaw, but a neurological groove repeated so often it becomes identity. And suddenly the enemy wasn't my life. The enemy wasn't my goals. The enemy was the invisible loop inside my mind. If you've ever felt trapped between who you are and who you know you could be, if your attention feels hijacked, your motivation unreliable, your discipline inconsistent, then this war is happening. Inside you too. Stay with me. This isn't a motivational speech. This is a dissection of the mind, yours and mine, guided by Nietzsche, sharpened by William James, and built to expose the truth behind why you hate doing hard things, and how to finally break that pattern from the inside out. Before we go deeper, I want to invite you into something simple. If any part of what I've said already feels uncomfortably true, if you recognize pieces of your own mind in the patterns I've described, or if you've ever felt alone in this strange war between dopamine and discipline, just leave a comment saying, "I understand." Not for the algorithm, not for numbers, but so I know you're here with me, another human trying to face the invisible battle happening behind your eyes. And if you want to stay in this journey with me, you can subscribe. No pressure, just presence. There's a moment every morning when my mind tries to negotiate with my future. It begins quietly, almost politely. A suggestion to slow down, to ease into the day, to postpone what matters until some mysterious hour when I'll feel ready. For years, I believed this voice was harmless. Now I know it was the architect of most of my failures. My brain doesn't wake up craving meaning. It wakes up craving dopamine, that quick hit of stimulation. That instant relief disguised as rest. That comfortable detour that feels productive, but leaves no mark on the world. And discipline, which I once imagined as a heroic inner strength, turned out to be something far simpler and far more unsettling. Discipline is what remains when the dopamine loop finally loses its power. But to reach that point, I had to see my mind for what it truly was, a battlefield. Nietzsche once wrote that the greatest wars are waged within the self. I used to think he meant moral conflict or existential dread. But now I see the psychological truth hidden inside his poetry. The war he described is the exact moment I decide whether to check my phone or open the book in front of me. The exact moment I choose whether to sit with discomfort or escape into something easy. The exact moment where my impulses try to overpower my intentions. William James experienced it too. He saw brilliant students at Harvard fall apart not because they lacked intelligence, but because they were trapped in mental habits that hollowed out their will. He noticed something I feel every time I try to work deeply. The mind is a river, and the water always flows toward the easiest path. Procrastination isn't a decision, it's erosion. And the erosion is silent. It happens in those tiny moments when I convince myself that a few minutes won't matter, that distraction is harmless, that I can start later. But later always steals something from me. Later is where my potential goes. To die. What troubled me most wasn't my lack of discipline. It was the realization that most of my actions were not chosen. They were automatic. The moment something became uncomfortable, my brain looked for escape. That's why hard things felt so impossible. Not because they were big, but because they demanded I stay inside a moment without relief. To face this war, I had to stop believing the lie that I had a focus problem. My problem was not focus, it was surrender. I surrendered to ease, to novelty, to the quick thrill that required nothing of me. I surrendered so often that surrender began to feel like identity. But identity can be rewritten. James proved that. Nietzsche demanded it. And the first step was accepting that every moment of resistance wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the opening shot of a war I was finally ready to fight. There are days when I feel a version of myself watching me from a distance, a quieter, sharper self, a self carved by effort rather than comfort. And every time I avoid something difficult, I feel the weight of that version staring back at me, disappointed but silent, like a ghost of who I could have been. Nietzsche understood this feeling better than anyone. He believed that human beings don't simply grow, they overcome. Not once, not occasionally, but continuously. And the enemy is not the world, or circumstance, or luck. The enemy is the smaller version of ourselves we keep choosing out of habit. When I first encountered his idea of the Übermensch, I misread it as arrogance or power. Now I see its honesty. Nietzsche wasn't celebrating dominance. He was warning me about the subtle ways I shrink from my own life. His insights felt like someone pressing a mirror to my face and asking without mercy, "Why do you run from the things that could make you stronger?" The question cut deeper than I expected, because I wasn't running from difficulty. I was running from the transformation difficulty demanded. Hard tasks don't just require effort. They require the death of my weaker patterns. And somewhere inside me, a part resisted that death. Nietzsche's idea of eternal recurrence intensified this confrontation. It forced me to imagine something terrifying. What if the day I am living now, this exact day, repeats forever? Not the imagined day I fantasize about. Not the improved day I promise myself after I fix everything. But this day, with its half-finished tasks, half-held intentions, half-hearted effort. Would I be proud? Would I be ashamed? Would I beg for a different life while endlessly replaying the one I refuse to change? Eternal recurrence isn't metaphysics. It's accountability. It's a demand that I stop pretending my small decisions don't matter. Because if repeated, they become fate. There was a night when this idea struck me so hard I couldn't sleep. I saw myself curled over my phone, scrolling through nothingness, escaping a project I claimed to care about. I saw how many times I postponed dreams behind micro hits of dopamine. I saw how often my desires were larger than my actions. Nietzsche's mirror made something painfully clear. I wasn't avoiding work. I was avoiding becoming the person the work required. And that person frightened me because he was disciplined, focused, honest. He was someone who didn't negotiate with difficulty, someone who embraced it. Amor fati, love your fate, is another idea I misunderstood for years. I thought it meant accepting whatever happens. But in Nietzsche's world, amor fati means something more violent, embracing the necessary suffering that shapes the self. It means saying yes not to comfort, but to the moments that burn away weakness. When I look through Nietzsche's mirror now, I understand the truth I once resisted. My life will not change when things get easier. My life will change when I stop running from the parts of myself that must be overcome. Before I understood anything about discipline, I believed my failures were moral. I thought something was wrong with me, that other people had a natural strength I simply lacked. But then I met William James, not in person, but in the pages of his work, and nothing in my inner world was the same after that. James didn't speak in poetry like Nietzsche. He spoke in mechanisms, systems, patterns. He showed me that the mind is not a battlefield of gods. It's a network of habits, grooves etched into the brain through repetition. What I called laziness was just momentum. Neurological. Inertia, a river flowing where it had always flowed. James believed that every action, no matter how small, deepens a pathway in the mind. A habit, he said, is not a choice repeated. It is a choice automated, and once a behavior becomes automatic, it no longer asks for permission. It simply happens. This explained something I had silently despised about myself. The way my hand reached for my phone without my consent. The way my body physically resisted starting difficult work. The way I felt. Exhausted before even beginning. It wasn't weakness. It was wiring, and wiring can be rewired. The idea that changed me most was James's claim that action precedes motivation, not the other way around. I had lived years waiting to feel ready, waiting for inspiration, waiting for the moment my emotions aligned with my intentions. But James exposed the delusion. Motivation is not a spark, it's a consequence. It grows out of movement, like warmth grows from friction. He introduced me to the power of what he called the first small act, something tiny, almost insulting in its simplicity. Opening a book, writing one sentence, standing up from a chair. James insisted that these moments were not meaningless. They were leverage, the point where the river changes direction, and I felt that truth inside my own body. The hardest part of any task has never been doing it. It's been starting. The moment before the beginning feels like a wall, but the moment after the beginning feels like release. That, or shift is momentum rewriting identity. James also taught me something more humbling. The environment wins more often than willpower. If my phone is near, I will touch it. If notifications are on, I will look. If distractions surround me, I will fall into them. Not because I am weak, because I am human. My environment shapes my behavior long before my intention does. He saw this clearly in his Harvard students. The best performers were not the most talented. They were the ones who built structures around themselves. Small rituals, physical barriers, predictable routines that made the right action easier and the wrong action harder. It wasn't their character that made them exceptional. It was their architecture. And when I realized this, I stopped asking, how do I become more disciplined? And started asking, how do I make discipline the path of least resistance? Because the secret is simple and brutal. If my environment supports my weakness will win. But if my environment supports my strength will grow. There came a moment when I realized something frightening. Insight alone wasn't enough to change me. Knowing why I avoided hard things didn't make me face them. Understanding dopamine didn't weaken its pull. Reading Nietzsche and William James didn't magically strengthen my discipline. Nothing changed. Until I started experimenting with 4 techniques that forced my brain to confront effort differently. Each technique is small, almost embarrassingly simple. But small things repeated daily become identity. This was the first technique that broke my inertia. The rule is simple. No matter how much resistance I feel, I do the task for 60 seconds. Just 1 minute. My mind can't argue with 1 minute. It's too small to fear, too possible to reject. But here's the secret James understood. The first minute is not the goal. It's the gateway. Once I begin, my brain shifts states. Dopamine cravings weaken. Momentum grows. The task that felt impossible becomes bearable. 1 minute often becomes 10, then 20, then a full session of deep work. Nietzsche would call this the first blow of the hammer, the act that declares war on my weaker self. James believed you could shape your inner world by acting from the identity you wished to inhabit, not pretending, not faking, practicing. So I began acting as if I were the kind of person who does the hard thing without negotiation. I sat straighter. I walked with urgency. I wrote with intention even when I felt empty. And slowly, my biology began believing the performance. My actions educated my emotions. Nietzsche understood this too. Become who you are is not a suggestion. It is an instruction manual. You move toward the person you embody. This one hurt the most. Amor fati, love your fate, what is not comfort, not acceptance, not passivity. It's a brutal, intimate partnership with discomfort. It's looking at something hard and saying, I needed you. Not because you enjoy suffering, but because suffering carves strength. So every time I felt resistance, cold mornings, difficult tasks, mental fog, I whispered to myself, good. This is the path. And strangely, the resistance softened. Pain became training, difficulty became preparation. This one turned discipline into a quiet game. Each day I acted according to my identity. I marked an X on a calendar. The chain grew. 3 days, 10 days, a month, and soon the thought of breaking it hurt more than the effort required. To continue, Nietzsche would say the chain gives weight to my actions. James would say it reinforces the neural pathway. Both are right. In these 4 techniques, I discovered something unexpected. Discipline is not heroic. It is cumulative. A slow, almost invisible bending of the self toward strength. There was a moment, quiet, almost unnoticeable, when I realized the battle had shifted. Not because everything suddenly felt easy, not because I became the kind of person who wakes up overflowing with motivation, but because something in me had crossed a threshold, a point where returning to who I used to be felt impossible. William James called this the point of no return in habit formation. Nietzsche called it becoming who you are. I call it the first day I no longer recognized the old version of myself. For most of my life, discipline felt like a fight against the grain of my nature. Every difficult task felt like a performance I would eventually grow tired of. But identity, true identity, doesn't rely on performance. It relies on repetition. James said that we are merely bundles of habits, and although the phrase sounds philosophical, it is deeply biological. Every action I repeat becomes easier to repeat again. Every choice I make becomes a vote for the person I'm becoming. I used to think identity was something I discovered. Now I understand it's something I build. And building it requires a different kind of courage. Not the loud kind, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet courage of consistency. The courage to show up when nothing in me wants to. The courage to follow a structure when my emotions beg to escape it. The courage to live the same day with intention until it becomes a natural extension of who I am. Nietzsche taught me that living a meaningful life requires the strength to bear its weight. Not just the weight of suffering, but the weight of responsibility. The weight of potential. The weight of the future I claim to want. He believed that greatness requires the willingness to shape oneself like a sculptor shapes stone, relentlessly, precisely, without apology. But James taught me how to sculpt, with rituals, with cues, with systems, with repetition so small it feels trivial. With days that look boring to the outside world but revolutionary to the inner one. And eventually, something remarkable happens. Discipline stops feeling like effort. It becomes identity. I noticed this on a random Tuesday. Nothing special happened. I woke up. Tired, a little foggy, already tempted to drift into distraction. But instead of falling into old loops, my body moved on its own. Desk, notebook, deep work. Not perfectly, not passionately, but automatically. And in that moment, I realized I no longer needed to force myself. The river had changed directions. The architecture had shifted. The internal gravity had aligned with my intentions. This is what Nietzsche meant. This is what James proved. And this is what I finally experienced. You do not become disciplined by thinking differently. You become disciplined by acting like the person you want to be until your mind has no choice but to follow. Identity is not the final step. Identity is the discipline. And once you embody it, the war becomes winnable. There's something humbling about reaching the end of a journey like this. Not because everything is resolved, not because the war is over, but because now you and I can finally see it for what it truly is. A quiet, personal battle. Fought in the smallest moments. A battle no one else can witness but everyone can feel. If any part of this resonated with you, if you saw pieces of your own mind in the patterns I described, if you felt that strange mixture of clarity and discomfort, the sense that something inside you is shifting, even if only by 1 millimeter, then I'm grateful you stayed, truly. And if you want to continue walking this path with me, to peel back more layers of the mind, to explore discipline, meaning, focus, dopamine, philosophy, psychology, you're welcome to subscribe or leave a comment, not out of pressure, not out of obligation, just as a quiet signal that you're here, awake, and choosing to grow. Even a single word is enough. Just write, I understand. Because every time you return to a space like this, you're casting a vote for the person you're becoming. And I'll be here, showing up with you, step by step, as we learn to shape our minds instead of surrendering to them. This war inside us is real, but it is not unwinnable. Not anymore. Thank you for being here.